Was on the cycle there.
What that? Cycling desk?
Yeah, down at the incubator right by the
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to see you today at College of Medicine. I have an honor to open a workshop series about entrepreneurship for postdocs. These workshops are organized by Postdoctoral Association, Office of Postdoctoral Affairs, and Intellectual Property Office. And today we have 5 panelists, and we will have a chance to discuss with them, and they will have a chance to share with us their idea, their experiences and methods, how to recognize innovative ideas and how eventually to bring them to the market. So I would like to introduce our panelists. Jeffrey Wallen, assistant scholar from Magnetic Field Lab and founder of Specialized Crystal Processing. Jason Robotham, postdoctoral associate at Biology Department and founder of Biofront Technologies. Jacob Van Landingham, assistant professor at College of Medicine and founder of Prevacus. Brent Eddington, director of commercialization at FSU. And John Fraser, executive director of Intellectual Property Office at FSU. Before we start discussion with our panelists, I would like just to ask them to briefly introduce themselves and to give us a little bit more details about personal background, about what sparked your interest, and what's your company's goal.
Hello. Hello. Hi there. Thank you. Appreciate the introduction. Happy to be here today. And my name is Jeffrey Whalen. Just a quick background on myself. I moved to Tallahassee in 2001 and did a biochemistry degree here at FSU, and then did a PhD in inorganic chemistry. And then stuck around and did a postdoctoral at the Mag Lab in the Condensed Matter Science Group. And then kind of got the businesses going at that point. For me, my background was always more in the areas of bulk crystal growth and crystal discovery. So going into the crystal business was kind of in line with a lot of the things I had been doing previously. I guess what sparked my interest was primarily this need that kept getting voiced to me from our colleagues and our collaborators that we were working with when we would publish papers. And a good amount of them were physicists or engineers who weren't very focused on necessarily crystal growth or crystals themselves, but utilized a lot of these materials in their own research, either for experimentation or for device development, things like that. So they kept coming to us and saying, we need these crystals. They're really exotic crystals. We can't just go buy them from the regular suppliers. We need to find somebody that can help us and grow it for us. And I'm sure at the time they were thinking somebody who can help them out for free and do it as a favor, but it kind of struck us as maybe a business opportunity to help meet that need for those individuals. So that's kind of what sparked the interest for us. It really was kind of a market-driven decision to go ahead and start making these crystals. And basically where our company is right now is we've kind of developed sort of what I call this menu of crystals, and it's all these different types of crystals that we can offer to our customers, and they can go and they can look at the list and they can choose something off it. But perhaps more exciting for the business is when customers can come to us and say, hey, we want something, but it's not on your list. Would you still be able to make it? So a lot of what we do now is evaluate new projects and look into the markets for those crystals, and that has spun off a couple of new development projects for us in the business. So we primarily right now are focused on growing some ceramic crystals, usually lanthanide oxide or mixed anion systems. For anybody that kind of has a chemistry background, you might know the types that I'm talking about. They're a little less common, and also some crystals that are organic based that get used in detectors. So that's sort of an update on currently where our business is and my background and a little information on what got us going. So thank you very much.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'd rather not use the mic because I tend to talk with my hands and then it just sounds like a swishing noise going around the microphone. So I definitely think the most value from these comes from the Q&A, but I can bore you a little bit with some background about myself since I'm probably as closely related to you guys as anybody here since I've just really finished doing a postdoc in the biology department full-time just last year and have transitioned to the company full-time now. So I came to Florida State University in 2000 and I did my PhD work in the biology department in Ken Rue's lab. And Ken worked on 2 projects at the time. He actually had a project working on HIV, which is why I came down here to work. And he had a side project that he had started with the food and nutrition where he was looking at identifying different proteins that elicited allergic responses in peanut and tree nut patients. So he said, work on this project on the side for a couple of months and maybe get a publication, and then we'll put you back on the HIV project. I said, great. And 6.5 years later, that was the subject of my dissertation for my PhD work. So it wasn't a bad thing, but when I finished, I still wanted to work in the field of virology. Heng Lee Tang came from the small startup in San Diego, where he was the director of infectious disease of a company called Immusol that worked on hepatitis C. So he was somebody I really wanted to work with. He and I agreed that I would do a postdoc in his lab for a semester, and we would see how it went. And during that time, he got some funding, and was able to stay in his lab for 3 years as a full-time postdoc. I was in Heng Lee's lab. I took some of the skills I had from Ken's lab, which was making these monoclonal antibodies to identify tree nut and peanut proteins. I transitioned that into Heng Lee's lab, and I made monoclonal antibodies to detect hepatitis C virus. And in Heng Lee's lab, I actually made a kit where we could detect the presence of the hepatitis C virus. And once I finished doing that, we actually had some reagents between the antibodies and the kit that people in industry and academia were really interested in. From an academic standpoint, Heng Lee was happy to give them to whoever needed them. From an industry standpoint, it wasn't as easy. We found these companies would want the reagents, but between lawyers and MTAs and things, it wasn't always so cut and dry that they could just get them from an academic lab. So they said, we'd really like to buy them from you. So kind of said, aha, let's start a company. We did some market research, thought there was a good opportunity there. And once we started the company, we sort of revisited things with my previous lab I did my grad work in. And that's sort of where the company is now. We transitioned the food allergy stuff to make these kits for detecting peanuts and tree nuts allergens that can be used by food manufacturers. So really where our company is now, we've spent the last 1.5 years commercializing these products, getting them to a point where they can actually be in a kit, shipped out to an end user. We're doing marketing, promotions, fundraising, and things like that. So how things have kind of come full circle for us.
Hello. Well, thank you all for coming. Am I screaming at you? I know a lot of people in here. Some of them know my story. I'll start career-wise. In my infancy, I was a physical therapist. And for 3 years, I worked with neurologically impaired kids that had had brain injuries in and around the time of birth. After that, I went back and got my PhD here at FSU in the neuroscience program, which some of you are probably familiar with Dr. Kathy Levinson, where I worked mainly on nutritional aspects of neuroscience, looking at different trace metals and how they had an effect on in models of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and Wilson's disease. Towards the end of my PhD work, I started working on a penetrating injury model for traumatic brain injury. And that was sort of when I went back to school. I got caught up in other stuff like Jason did. And we were able to publish a paper, and after that I moved over up to Emory and did my postdoc where a lot of you guys are now. So I postdoced at Emory for about a year, and then I took an instructor position there. And I was lucky enough to get to run, I was assistant director for their emergency medicine research. Is it usually? Restart. Hello? Hello? Yeah, it's coming back. All right.
It counts your words, you reach the end of the point.
There you go. Good. Can I sit back down? The Q&A is the value of this, right? Anyway, so I worked there on a clinical trial for severe traumatic brain injury for 2 or 3 years using progesterone to try to reduce intracranial pressure, swelling associated after major car accidents and other things that lead to severe brain injury. That trial's in phase 3 right now, and we can talk in the Q&A about different clinical trial phases if you're interested. When I came back to FSU, they put me in the classroom doing a lot of teaching for the first couple of years. Then in 2009, I was able to free up some of my time and start developing concussion models. We developed a drug for the treatment of mild traumatic brain injury or concussion. We put our first provisional patents in for those in 2011 with the help of Dr. Fraser here. And then we moved in 2012 where we actually opened the company that is called Prevacus. We've been fortunate enough to do a pretty good raising money, doing all the preclinical efficacy studies, put a lot of time and energy into developing new patents on how to synthesize the drug quicker and with a greater purity. And we're proud to say we're in toxicology now, so we're on our timeline so far. So hopefully into March we'll actually be in phase 1 clinical trials and establishing the safety of the drug. So that's where we are today. Look forward to your questions.
Phase 1, is that on? Yeah. Phase 1 clinical trials, that's pretty good in that sort of timeline. They're doing really well. My progression is a little different. Right now I'm not in a startup company full-time. I started out by getting my PhD in genetics at the University of Connecticut in heat shock gene expression. I decided I wanted to do something a little different for my postdoc, so I did a postdoc in plant molecular biology and plant gene expression and altering plant gene expression and plant defense mechanisms and pathogens and things like that. And while I was in my postdoc, I started reading a little bit about ribozymes, catalytic RNA. And I thought, this is exciting. This is a lot of fun. So what I did is I went to my boss and said, look, we have all the resources here to do a project to demonstrate ribozyme altering gene expression. We have all the facilities. We have an expert with tobacco mosaic virus. We can genetically engineer a tobacco plant to express ribozymes against the tobacco mosaic virus and see if we can, save the world for tobacco plants and kill all the TMV that attacks the tobacco plants and produce resistant tobacco plants, just as a model system. My boss said no. Said, I hired you for something different. So do what I hired you for. So after 2 months, I went back to him and said, look, this would be great. We have all the resources. Let's do this. And he said, okay, after 6 o'clock. You're doing your job from 7 in the morning until 6. If you want to do something extra, do it. I'll give you the resources and do it. So we were fairly successful. We're able to, in protoplast systems, to watch and see how ribozymes could catalyze and cleave tobacco mosaic virus, and it was fairly successful. And lo and behold, there was a company starting about the time I got done with my postdoc called Ribozyme Pharmaceuticals. I applied for and got a job with them and was head of their agricultural division. And I was with them for about 5 years until after they went public, and that was quite a ride. To be with a company that grows, gets quite a bit of investment, Nobel Prize winning technology, and to be involved in taking it public. We got to the point where we were burning through, I guess this isn't good, but we were burning through about $1 million a month. Developing different chemistry systems, and it was a lot of fun. And I was a total scientist. I slept in the lab. I was in the lab all the time. And in fact, there was a colleague of mine that was a great scientist, and he decided, he had his PhD, and he decided he was going to go back to law school and be a patent attorney and continue working with the company, but as a patent attorney. And I went and talked to him and told him, I'm sorry you're doing this with your life. you're leaving science. You know, your life's, basically over now. Little did I know that in just a few short years, I was going to be going to get my MBA. And, I thought that was really humorous, how life changes people. After Ribozyme Pharmaceuticals, I was in some other startup companies and some reagents companies and things like that. And because of the nature of startup companies going up and down, I found myself at one point without employment. So I had a friend of mine that was an attorney, and I worked with him. And what he did was he set up contracts with various mid-sized or larger-sized investment banks, at least a couple of billion in assets, or financial management firms. What he set these contracts for was a wealthy investor who flipped IPOs on the market. He would gain access, with the contacts that these firms would have. He would buy about 70% of the IPOs that would come out and flip them. And he was doing extremely, extremely well. So I worked with him, and I did the cold contacting the investment banks and financial managers, and I thought, I like this. I'm getting the same excitement from this that I used to get from being in the lab. So I got a taste of what it was like to do that sort of thing, more of a business development. And it was easy at that time. It was during
Did you get a piece of the action?
Yes, I did. And real quickly, I worked really hard, maybe 100 hours a year, and I was pulling in some pretty good money because I was getting a percentage. I got so bored with hiking in the mountains above Boulder, Colorado, that I decided I needed to do something else, so I went back and got my MBA for fun. And that was during 98, 99, 2000 when IPOs were going wild. It wasn't a normal situation. When it crashed, I needed to do something else. So I did. I started working for technology commercialization at the University of Utah then. And I've been doing that since the early 2000s. I've been involved in 6 startup companies myself. A couple of them as one of the initial employees, and a few also as a founder. I've been in technology commercialization again since for about 12 years, 11 or 12 years. And in that capacity, I've been involved in starting 28 companies, from licensing to startup companies. And I find the same excitement in that I found in doing experiments. That it's fun and it's exciting. I told John when I interviewed that startup companies are the funnest headache you can have. They're a lot of hard work and they're a blast. And I find that same excitement in what I'm doing now, to be able to do transactions and get technology out so it's commercialized, so it's to the public and people are utilizing it. And I find that to be very exciting. Yes, what sort of got me going or what interests me about startup companies, well, it's not necessarily the startup company. It's getting commercialization going. And another thing, I mentioned this also, is that my wife has addictions, and that's probably why I'm not in startup companies all the time, because she's addicted to eating, she's addicted to having a roof over her head, and some stability, and things like that. And being involved with technology commercialization from a university atmosphere with embryonic technology gives much of the same excitement and thrill that you get in a startup company.
Good afternoon, I'm John Fraser. Unlike you, I do not have a PhD. I am a Canadian. Got fed up with the tax regime in my country and went to, with my undergraduate degree, went to the University of California, Berkeley to get a PhD. Wanted to see whether I could get in with the best of the best. I could. And then after a couple of years realized that it was another 2 years to get my degree and then probably 2 more postdocs before I could do what I promised my wife, which was get an academic position. And so together we made the decision to leave Berkeley with a master's degree. We moved back to Canada, where I became a senior officer in the Canadian National Science Foundation. And for 8 years, I was Mr. Moneybags, as far as faculty were concerned, across the country in all fields, medical, social, chemistry. Had a whale of a good time. Enjoyed it, met many of the smartest people, and then decided I could either retire mentally and in government life for the rest of my career, or I could keep alert and go off and do something else. So quit a good paying job. Wife Kathy and I have been married 44 years, and I'm incredibly thankful that she supported me wherever I wanted to go. And now as I'm beginning to think about retirement, it's a case of thinking about where she wants to go. So that's usually where the grandkids are. Left the granting agency in Canada and joined a startup venture capital firm. It was based in Vancouver, Canada. We wanted to live there because of the city itself, and it focused on university startups. This is back when the earth was cooling in the 80s, early 80s actually, and we were the only ones doing it. Did that for about 4 or 5 years. We ended up selling the business, and I then consulted, ended up going down to a raw startup in Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. It was 1986. We raised $3.5 million. I was a co-founder, and we ended up selling the company about 4 years later. Very fortunate. Not enough money, obviously, to retire on. And the nature of it was a service business. The service was offering tech transfer services to universities that 6 years after the enacting law in the United States didn't know how to go about tech transfer. And so we filled that function, and we then sold the business. Then went back to Canada, did the same thing for the University of Calgary out west, ran into a recession, got laid off, traumatic experience, and then consulted, and then came down here about 17 years ago where I started the tech transfer office. It's been an interesting ride, seeing all that. One of the things when Keisha, raise your hand up, Keisha, so everyone knows who you are. Keisha Johns is I'll call her the postdoc official person in the university. When she and Malika came to me and said, "Can you help us?" I said, "Sure," because it's important for people to realize that there are a lot of opportunities out there that you can do with your degree that perhaps, like me, you weren't exposed to when you were in undergraduate school or even graduate school. You go to Berkeley and you don't talk about going into industry. Okay, it's just at that time was not discussed. You just didn't do it. Very interestingly, the year I graduated, gene splicing was discovered in the Bay Area, and all of a sudden, people that considered industry dirty realized that they could get into a technology-driven business and do some very interesting things. That whole biotech industry, founded on university inventions, has now dramatically changed. But still, Brent referred to people with degrees becoming patent examiners, becoming patent attorneys, billing out at $400 or $500 so an hour. So there's a lot of very interesting things that you can do. And so I was delighted to be able to respond, and that's my background. I did one other thing. Let me think what that was. Yeah. What sparked my interest? I have never been an entrepreneur. I have been a co-founder. What that means is you share the risk. So when you put together you either go work for an entrepreneurial company, but as a co-founder, you can share the risk and do what each of you do well together. And so the skills that I had were schmoozing and deal doing. My partner understood technology better than I did. And so a partnership or joining an entrepreneurial company means that you don't have to tell your wife you can't pay the mortgage at the end of the month, or a whole variety of interesting things. So one of the things I was excited about contributing today, and then I'm done, is beginning to talk about the wealth of opportunities that exist that are not black and white. A researcher or an entrepreneur. Forget that. Black and white. You can do a lot of this and some of that. You can do less of this and more of that. You can become a person with a good degree in an entrepreneurial environment. That's not a standalone company where there's a tremendous amount of risk. You can take that attitude into corporations, governments, universities, large and small. So how are our companies doing? I co-founded 3, buried 2 of them. The third one we sold. And like Brent, I've been a midwife for a large number of other companies. Find it very exciting. My job now is not to do, but to encourage and provide networks and links to people that can help the entrepreneur do. So that's it. I'll hand this back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your introductions. And I would like to open now this workshop for questions from the audience. And also I would like to encourage you to ask any questions that could help you eventually commercialize your own ideas or eventually co-found the company. And I would like to start just with a question asking our panelists to maybe give us a little bit more details about the process of commercializing ideas, about actually what did you not expect when you kind of realize you have a great idea and that can be commercialized, or you can found or co-found a company, but actually what you did not expect in that process.
What I did not expect. There was a lot of things that came up that I didn't exactly expect, but probably the one that pops to mind the most was how different it was when you were in a position to sell something or potentially sell something. The interactions that you would have with your prospective customers. It was really easy in academic research to converse with somebody and say, wow, if this was available, you'd buy it, right? And you'd say, yeah, of course I'd buy it. But coming back and saying, hey, I've got this now. You said you'd buy it. And seeing people's very different reactions of, sort of put your money where your mouth is kind of saying, that was pretty unexpected. That's probably, I think, for me, the biggest thing that was kind of shocking was just learning the intricacies of human nature when it comes to closing deals.
Yeah, I think that what Jeff just said is probably something we can all probably echo. When you have an idea for a commercial product and you do all your market research and you sort of figure out what you think the sales will be or what your potential sales can be, especially if you think the product is bigger, better, cheaper. If there's an existing product out there, one of the things I've been really surprised by is how reluctant people are to switch. And I even know it from being in lab. We get reps come by and they'll send out specials and this is cheaper. Why won't you get? We've used it before. We know it works. And so getting over that barrier has been something that's been kind of surprising. Actually reaching your end user and finding out what you need to do to them to, even if you have a commercial product, to get them to actually buy it. So that's been something that's been challenging, but it's unexpected, but we do think that we can get past it also.
I can't say there's been a lot unexpected. I will say that when you go out and raise money, even if individuals haven't given you or invested in your company, they all have opinions, and you don't even have to ask for them. So you do get a lot of people think that they know what's best for you when you get involved in something like this, and that can be a little tiring at times.
One of the things that was most surprising, and this will show how naive I was, Started a DNA analysis lab, paternity analysis, forensics, and things like that, and as a founder. Co-founder. There were about 3 or 4 of us that started the company, and I was the managing director of it. And I knew the people that I started the company with, and I thought, these are good people. You know, I know them, but they didn't have the experience. And I thought, I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time, and the company was where overhead was fairly cheap, and in Oklahoma. And I was directing the company from a few hundred miles away. And that's okay, and that's possible when you have mature, experienced people. The gist of it is the company failed. We were starting to be able to pay our bills, paying our loans back, and everything was going well. We were working on paternity analysis in such a way that we had the highest profit margin for the type of thing that we were doing. We had a national way of collecting samples through home nursing agencies that we would send packets to them, and we're doing fairly well. And we were able to, have a system where we could utilize the tests within court and things by having a chain of custody system. Everything was going well. And then some of the people that I knew very well pulled off some interesting tricks and put us under, sold some of our equipment out of the lab, and turned our website into their personal site, and did some interesting things. Now, the gist of all this is that I just knew these people. I thought, okay, they're fine. In some of the enterprises I've been involved in since then, I did a little more scrutinizing of the individuals in the background before I would involve myself with them. Boy, was I naive when I first got out of my postdoc and was doing some of these, starting a business on the side. People are one of the most important aspects of a business. Who you're working with, who you're putting your future into their hands.
I'm going to echo that. The startup we did in North Carolina, I learned after I joined it, I spent a year commuting down from Toronto to Raleigh, writing business plans and helping raise money. And moved the family down, and it took me a week to realize that my partner had hired a woman that he was sleeping with. And it was kind of a lovely woman. North Carolina, came in every morning, woke herself up by drinking 2 cans of Diet Coke and smoking 3 cigarettes, and that nicotine whack woke her up. So you learn some things. The first thing you learn is find out who's sleeping with who and where the bloodlines go. Okay, so like Brent, you learn some things. I learned 2 other things. America is a fabulous country where you can do a startup and you can easily find someone who will buy your product once. No matter what your product is, you can sell it, and there is someone in this country that will buy it. And the lesson is how you take that one sale and scale it into a more viable business. The second thing I learned, we did a startup superconductivity company, and we sold our stock just before the company went public for $11 million US. And I was project manager and got a counter check, FedEx up to me. This is a long time ago. And went to my bank to put it in, and it bounced. It was a counter check. It had been signed by the Florida bank. And so you learn quickly, the deal's not done until your banker tells you the other guy's check is in the bank and did not bounce. And these are very hard lessons that you learn, and if you're lucky, it doesn't kill you. If you're lucky, it doesn't take the company under, and you can continue to work and move forward. But again, America is a place, and I've traveled the globe, and America is a place where if you say I'm engaged in entrepreneurial activity or I'm doing a startup or something, people at a cocktail party will come over and talk to you. There are places in the world where you say that and people look at you like, what? Why on earth would you do something as dumb, as risky, and as fraught with problems as that? So we're all lucky to be here in this country. It's a good time to do things like this. any of these companies that we're talking about, the ones we're talking about, are driven by technology. And that means that there's a lot of product development that has to happen, which means it's going to take a long time, which means you have to find a flow of money to sustain the company until you get product in the marketplace and you become cash neutral or cash positive. But it's a fabulous opportunity. Again, my point is people like yourselves that have good degrees, there's a huge number of opportunities out there, including the academic opportunity.
Actually, I can use this microphone. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
How did you fund any of your businesses? Personal money? Angel?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to fund a business.
How did you do it?
How did I do it? Yeah. So we had a loan from the State Institute, which John's a part of. We also got a lot of private money that we got from investors. And we've written a lot of grants that we're still waiting to hear back to help fund. And then we've gone out to high net worth people and organizations across the country and began to establish relationships with them because we know we're going to be in a situation here before phase 2 clinical trials where it's going to get real expensive. So it's a game. You got to stay ahead of it every day. You got to be worried about it.
So, just to follow up, I mean, it's great to say that you went to a private person and got money from them, but how did you find that person's name? What did you do to make that contact? Did you go to John and ask, do you know some people, or how do you go about doing that sort of thing?
Yeah, we started out here locally. We went to some folks here, I won't name names, who have had good careers and have made a lot of money here in the community. We had a group of 5 people who came out and signed the first checks to get our bank account going, and then it became a word of mouth thing around here locally, and we had a pretty good run for a few months of having other folks come in and fund it, and then we went out and got a CFO who started doing work with angel investors out in Southern California, and began to establish those relationships and bring in money in that way.
Can I ask you to respond to that question, starting with the family roots? That was, I think, very...
Yeah, so both I've been around here a long time. Yeah, both my brothers are doctors here in town too, and we have a network of people that we could reach out to for something like this. We were in an advantageous situation from my family and who we knew, but also from the standpoint of the media and concussions. It's such a hot thing, and nobody else was trying to treat it. It was like catching lightning in a bottle, being in the right place at the right time. And that's not why I started this. I've been doing it since 1995, working with brain injured patients and stuff. But it just so happened once I got with John and we started coming up to do this and actually take a chance, the media coverage went crazy, and that just made it a lot easier for us. So it looks like I've been successful at doing this, but I had a lot of advantages, and I'm the first one to admit that.
So personal network primarily.
Yeah, I think I sort of had a similar path. Our company went through the Florida Institute for the Commercialization of Public Research, and they provide a matching loan for a certain amount of funds that you're able to raise. Then the hard part becomes actually going out and raising that money. So for me, and this kind of ties into John's story about the checks doesn't clear until it's actually in the bank. We tried to get as much exposure as we could through different events that FSU put on. The Research Foundation does something called FSU Sneak Peek, which is if you have a commercial product or a startup company, they'll let you showcase it. And there's a really good network of local people, potential investors that come and will look and talk to you. And it was somebody actually who saw us there that contacted us and said they would be interested in investing in the company, and they had the money to do that, and we kind of thought that that deal was done, and it sort of fell through at the very last minute, which was sort of heartbreaking. You kind of pick yourself up and go back and say, how can I make this happen again? And for me, I did go the sort of friends and family route. Fortunate enough to be friends with or have some very successful people that still call me their friends, and so they were interested in investing in the company. And you'll find this too, if you start a company, the people really feel like they're investing in you. So they were willing to invest 2 years ago, and I wasn't willing to accept their money at that time because it was just too much of a risk, I felt. And it wasn't until I felt like this was a very real opportunity, something that I could sit down and comfortably talk to them about and feel like I would almost be doing a favor to go this route with them, that I accepted that. And so that's really the route we went. And I think most startups, or at least most of the people I talk to, there's some element usually of that. It's the people closest to you that will be part of your initial investment. If you're lucky enough to have an angel or a venture fund you, then so be it. But a lot of times they'll want a lot of your company, or they'll want the company will have to be bigger for them to be interested in. So that worked well for us.
Raising money in the beginning, the very, very beginning, I think if I had money, I would have invested my own money in it, but I had no money, so that was an easy decision. And from there, I think there's something to be said in not having money and having the choice of crying about it and using it as an excuse to not get your business going, versus teaching yourself how to present a compelling business opportunity for your startup. And that's a tool that you can now use to talk to other people about why they should give you their money to get your business going. So I did a lot of that, just kind of learning how to talk the lingo, learning how to present the business opportunity to somebody who could invest in a way that might get us a chance of further conversation. But that's something that can be applied to pitch competitions like the ones that are run here in Tallahassee and here at FSU. So our startup took advantage of a few of those competitions, and we were fortunate enough to get some funding there via grant money. But I think that the best thing that really helped us, even now, is really focusing on developing the business in ways that you know that you are directly meeting your customers' needs. And it's really easy to get wrapped up in spending money on a sign and a business car and a huge facility and really fancy cards and all kinds of stuff that goes along with business, where really the focus should maybe more on mitigating the risks of getting your startup going. And by risks, I purely mean going through lots and lots of development and getting something awesome that nobody wants to buy. Mitigating that risk is paramount in terms of making the dollars that you have stretch as far as they can go. That'd be my input.
Yes.
I have a question for Mr. Fraser. You had mentioned that it's really important, or not important, but a lot of people most of you are postdocs. I haven't got a PhD. I have a bachelor's. I plan to get a PhD. I just snuck in here because I find this interesting. But you had mentioned that it's really important to get exposed or to be aware of what is out there. So my first question is, how do you get exposed to those things? And second, a lot of people, if not everyone here, did not have a linear path to where they're at right now. It kind of seemed to have gone like this. How do you mitigate a lot of those pitfalls, or prepare yourself as much as possible so that you don't potentially take a huge face plant through the process?
All right. Two questions. Awareness and pathway to success.
Yeah.
To become aware, I invite all of you to come to our sneak peek. It's November the 7th, 5:30 to 7:30 at the Challenger Learning Center downtown. Admission is free. There's food and booze. And we're looking for 30 to 40 faculty who, like the guys here, are willing to present not their gee whizzy technology, but how they see their technology applied to a real problem, and they're beginning to go down that path. So that's an awareness. That's number one. Number two, Ron Frazier, who's the entrepreneur in residence in the business school, is working with students who have their own idea about what they want to do, and through him or through our office, become aware of the resources that exist on the campus or here in the community. The availability of resources is changing dramatically very quickly. So what was the case even 2 years ago is irrelevant now. There's a lot more happening here. So this is a sneak peek. We also have, and each of the guys here has been fortunate to win money from our internal proof of concept fund, our GAP fund. And I invite you to come, I think it's November the 17th, 7:30 till noon, down in the park. And again, look at our website. Presentation by faculty looking for proof of concept money. And again, probably 8 or 10 faculty projects going on. Take a look at our website. We're very transparent. All our results are there. And the people we've been engaged in, the name of their project, whether they got money or not, what it was all about. There's another way to quickly find what's happening. And then, literally, one of the reasons I got enthusiastic when I look at Melissa, I apologize, 12 Ways to Sunday, I will never get your name right. And hopefully when you get married, your family name's a little simpler than the one currently that I refuse to even attempt. I apologize.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Pathway. There's no path that's simple and straightforward. The issue is deciding to be engaged on the journey. And when you stumble and have a face plant, I invested in a company, lost not a lot of money, but lost it. You get up, press the pulse. The thing about this country is that you're not branded a failure and discarded as someone who tried something and didn't succeed. People who take a face plant, get up and go on are seen as having had experience. So it's better to invest in them because they've been tripping and falling and they know what they're doing, supposedly. So the pathway forward is get engaged in groups like this. There's an undergraduate CEO council in the business school where they bring in speakers and just finding people. There's a group called DOMI, D-O-M-I. They will be engaged probably before the end of the calendar year to open and run an incubator here in town that will solicit applications from students, non-students, faculty, and others, again for startup companies. So it's a matter of finding out. I think part of this has to do with a very fundamental, simple thing. Who's your significant other in life, and where do you want to live? And if together you decide you want to live in California, go live in California. You decide you want to live in Tallahassee because you find it a better place to raise children. The cost of livings are very, very different than California. Then make that decision, look around, and find out where the resources are. You can do this type of thing anywhere. Do this type of thing even in Canada, for God's sakes, which it's not a very entrepreneurial country. I would kill to protect that country because of what it gave me, but the idea of being an entrepreneur there is a little like being an entrepreneur in Tallahassee. It's not well understood. People aren't that familiar with it. They don't know where to go to find out what's going on. And let me just, the pathway thing. There's no right way. It's just, I want to be engaged on the path, in the journey, and I'm not going to jump off the cliff to do it. I'm going to take a step at a time. I'm going to make a certain level of commitment, see how it goes, and then commit more or commit to something else. It's like that. It's just like getting married. You go a step at a time, and all of a sudden you realize that this is what I want, this is what I need. You then commit, and then all of a sudden very unexpected challenges pop up. Like, what do you do with 3 kids, for God's sakes? You're responsible for them, and you're not educated, you're not trained. How do you handle all that? Well, being an entrepreneur is the same thing. I want to do this. I've got people who want to support me and work with me, and we can go along the path, and then we'll see what happens.
I wanted to say something real quick to the pathway. All success deals with being lucky, and the harder you work, the luckier you get. If that makes any sense. And I would just encourage people to go do something. I've learned that people are, as I said, people are important. The last venture I was involved in that I still own significant stock in, I made sure the people and who they were and what they were and what their values were and how hard they were going to work. But you will fail. I don't know anybody how many of you have had successful experiments every time you ran one? I mean, you will fail. As an entrepreneur, as a scientist, you go down a wrong path, and then you learn from that path, you evaluate the results, and you decide, I will make different decisions and do something different in my next experiment because of what I just learned. It's the same thing. It's the same problem-solving issues.
I guess I have a short question and a follow-up a little bit to his. Does anybody have any experience with SBIR or other forms of government contracts working with governments? And also, looking at your websites, it seems like there's a lot more emphasis on technology transfer of faculty work than there is in helping graduate students. And that's just the impression I've gotten. So,
Can I address that? SBIRs, yes. And specifically, before the end of this calendar year, the Vice President of Research is likely to launch a much more focused mechanism to help faculty, and I'll get to your faculty graduate students in a sec, help faculty be aware of SBIR opportunities, broker with companies, help put applications together, and then help manage the situation. So it's that we hope will be launched in the not too distant future. Now, faculty and graduate students. Fundamentally, it's a case of we work with the intellectual property that's owned by the university. And what that means is if you're an employee, a graduate student, a faculty member, a staff member, what you invent must be disclosed to the university and we'll likely do something with it or attempt to do something with it. And undergraduates, we don't own the intellectual property, at least as long as I'm here, I can tell you. And so we don't work in that area. With respect to faculty and graduate students, it's a case of who's the boss and who's the employee. In most cases, the faculty member has engaged the graduate student on a coursework to move forward. And we welcome the changing environment where faculty and graduate students are saying, maybe there's something else we can do outside the laboratory to maybe commercialize this. Or if you want to spend a bit of your time working towards your thesis on something that is more applied, as long as it's creative, that maybe there's room for conversation. At the end of the day, the bulk of what we are engaged in is financed by the federal government through the university to a faculty member who is the principal investigator. And that individual will hire students, graduates, postdocs, research associates. And we'll tend to focus in on the person that signs the check. What we really pay attention to is finding out who has contributed creatively. And it's in that situation that it gets a little delicate when we probe in. Some faculty I know, none in this room, of course, have egos. So they're the brilliant ones that do all the work. And the graduate students just carried out the job that was tasked to them. We don't take that ever at face value. So because it turns out, if you seek a patent and obtain it, you must list all the creators If you do not, it ends up in court, and the other side determines that there was a student whose name should have been on there and is not on there. You lose in court, and that costs a ton of money. So it's been, I think, historically the way that offices like ours have approached it. I think there's been a dramatic change even in the last 5 years. And given that we're in Tallahassee, which is a relatively small community, we're looking for people like Jay, who started off as a postdoc and a research associate, and his colleague Darren is right, who are working in the lab. The faculty member is not willing to be the driver, but willing to support the postdoc or the research associate. So we're saying, this is something that we have to be talking much more broadly about with postdocs, graduate students, and others as part of their career development, which we're willing to do.
Any questions? Maybe other panelists can make some comments also about having a good idea and discussing with PI, or I don't know if your idea came from you or came from your PI, and how did you kind of develop that into successful relationships so that you can transition from postdoc, from academia, to someone who is actually co-founding a company?
Just follow on, because the question I have is very related to that, and that is, how do you deal with the good idea? Because the good idea is 100% of the future business, but as soon as it gets out, quite often these days, anybody can do it, because sometimes it's obvious once somebody realizes it.
So I'll try to attempt this one. So if you've got a good idea and you've got a solid patent portfolio, yes, it's certainly possible that somebody could get around one of your patents. But the goal is throughout the existence and even prior to starting your company, you've established a patent portfolio that you are constantly growing and constantly aware of how you want to protect it. We call it the briar patch. My colleague calls it the barbed wire. But anyway, the point is that you have 5 years with a new chemical entity in our world before a generic can come in and try to compete with you anyway. So if we weren't a new chemical entity, you'd have around 3 years. So there is a certain period of time that you're somewhat protected from the outside generic companies already. What your hope is when those 5 years are up, your patent portfolio is so strong that the generics don't even want to mess with you. But that's not always the case. But you do have a little bit of time to do well before you got the competition.
I think also besides patents, if your technology isn't patentable, which for us it isn't, other people can go out and make antibodies and do this, but if you have a head start before you launch your product, sometimes that's overwhelming enough for the competition to the point where it's just not worth it for them to go out and repeat what you did. So people will say, well, can't somebody else come in and do that? And they say, yeah, absolutely. If they want to spend X amount of dollars and so many years to do it, they can do it, or they can work with us or try to acquire us to do that. So I think how you position yourself prior to launching your product can also provide some type of IP protection that is sort of outside of just a patent.
Along the lines of both questions that you that you asked, Duncan, I think that this is really just my opinion, but I think that the easiest way to navigate through the confusion of having the idea and founding the business from the idea is really just being bluntly honest with people that are involved in that project. And it's really easy to avoid talking about things that are uncomfortable, like how much of a percent are you going to own and how much am I going to own. It's easy to avoid that conversation when you're talking about innovation, because it's way more fun to talk about the innovation. But I think you have to force yourself to bring those topics to the table with the people that are involved. And if you don't do that, you set yourself up for surprises, and those are never good in business. You really want to have everything right out there, and And right that way it gives you the opportunity right off the bat, if you're PI or grad student or whatever, says, well, no, I was thinking I'm going to own 90% of this. What are you talking about 40%? It gives you an opportunity to talk about that and nip it in the bud right away. And even if you have to leave the table with the unresolved issues, those issues are now open and out there for both or all the parties involved to think about. So I think that, but with all of that being said, I really have the mentality that it's easy to get bogged down in the nitty gritty of the ownership and the IP protection, and all of these things are really important when you're founding businesses. But I like to focus more on the actual business opportunity, because if there's no real market there and there's no real drivers there that are going to push this thing to where it becomes something significant, all your efforts to structure and legalize everything, they're all kind of just pie in the sky. So I tend to say that, it's just structure it, put it out there, be honest, just get it done so that you can focus on what's most important, which is actually commercializing and not, negotiating.
Yeah, I think, like Jeff said, don't avoid that conversation. That needs to be had. It's maybe not the most uncomfortable thing, or the most comfortable thing. It probably depends on the relationship you have with your advisor at the time. And then also, the GAP program at FSU is really great because, and I think all three of us have gotten GAP grants. You're presenting to a panel of business people who will tell you, who will force you to do market analysis to know if you really have a good idea that can be commercialized and if it's a real opportunity or not. So I think that would be something that would be a great first step. I know for us that helped us really push us over the edge to say, we should look at this more seriously. So.
Can I pitch the GAP for just 10 seconds?
Yes. 10 seconds.
Checking on my calendar, and for those of you who would like to come, be aware of what's happening on the campus. Sit in the audience and see faculty up presenting. It will occur the morning of November 19, Tuesday. It's down in Innovation Park in Building B on the second floor. Everyone is welcome to come and sit and listen. The presentations are usually, Q&A and presentation usually 20 minutes. We have people coming for certain and then leaving, so there's always a flow of people. So for a variety of reasons, I encourage you to come that morning and just kind of see what's going on and hang around and talk to people. Thank you for that plug.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, I can ask a question. So tell us more about your team. How many people was in your team at the beginning, at the very first day, and how many is now, and how did you choose them, and any lessons learned from them?
So the team really began with a technician that I was working with me here at FSU. I hired him into the company to do some of the lab rat stuff. And I hired a chief scientific officer, Mike Lewandowski, very early on. Then we were lucky enough to have an inside with the State Institute, and Jamie Grooms came on and helped us as the interim CEO. Then within about 5 months, we hired a CFO to help us not only with the accounting and bookkeeping, but also with fundraising out in Southern California. We brought on a investor relations person here to deal with the local folks, and we brought on an administrative assistant to deal with all the travel and all the, getting checks and everything paid. And so we brought in another person. So we grew within 6 months. We had about 10 employees. Within a year, we had 10 or 12 consultants across the country. So we're about 22 strong now as a group in about a year and 3 months. So it's been pretty fast.
Great.
Did I learn anything from them? I learned a lot of them know a lot more than I do, and I think the good Lord every day they agreed to join me.
I think Jeff and I have similar teams in that we started with our advisors, and so that was sort of decision made. We've added a couple people since then, since we got some funding through the Institute and added some board members and scientific advisors, things like that. But really, as a true startup, your team, you're most of the team. And I always tell people, I'll answer the phone as the technical support person, and then let me connect you to shipping, and then answer, click over and I'm the shipping guy, because you're doing everything. I mean, it's the whole life cycle of the product, from the creation to the product support and shipping and doing everything. So it's definitely not as glamorous as it can sound sometimes. And if the toilet needs to be cleaned, we'll do that too. So you have to do everything for your business when you're starting.
Yeah, for me it was me and my postdoc advisor. We kind of kicked the business off, and that was really what I would consider our first team. An extended team, though, I mean that's really gray area. Like, I mean, you could say that's comprised of mentors and advisors and consultants and friends that do things for free and subcontractors and collaborators. I mean, it can be kind of anyone who wants to work with the business. You can always figure out a capacity in which they can do so. But we did grow our team a little bit, and our core team. And I think the significance in doing that was, at least for me, was getting people on the team who had sort of an entrepreneurial mind already. We did have one person who came in, and when we restructured, that person left the startup. And I think a lot of the reason was that because he was really looking for a job at a business that was already fully established, and that's so different than the life of a startup. I mean, everybody on the startup team's got to be an entrepreneur in order to get this thing off the ground, or you're just going to be. It'll be the people who have that mindset that'll be running the show and driving the boat. So for us, that was really key. Was that the people that were in our core team really had the vision for growing the business like we did, so that when you delegated tasks or when you relied on these people, you could have a high level of confidence that they were going to come through, and not come through for me, but come through for the business, and that was the mentality that they had. So we added about 3 technicians to the business, and I'm really happy to say that these young guys, they are the ones that they move and shake. I mean, they're the ones that are really doing the operations for us, in our case, production. And it's great to see these guys get exposure at pitch competitions and things like that, and come up to me afterwards and say, Jeff, I want to pitch next time. And I'm thinking, that's great. You're really in the game here. So that's just, I guess, a little experience from us.
Okay. Yeah, John would like to say something.
2 things. As I mentioned earlier, being a co-founder and having others that you work with, I found alleviated a lot of the risk. And the second thing is, I don't know what it's like to be a postdoc. Okay, I wasn't, but I was a graduate student at a good school. And man, is it lonely. You are expected to make your own career. You're expected to pick a project with some guidance and carry it out. There's others you can talk to, but it's all on your back. You are the one solely responsible for getting that done. In a startup or a team, it's more like a marriage. There's more sharing involved. I'm good at this, and you're good at that, so let's work together. I said I've been married a long time, and you learn what a marriage is all about when your wife's been up with the kids who've been puking everywhere because they've been sick, and she's exhausted, flops into bed, and you have to get up and make your own breakfast the next day. Okay? Sounds very chauvinistic, but all of a sudden you realize that not only that, you've got to take that diaper pail and you got to go into the toilet and clean it up because she can't. You need to do that. So all of a sudden you realize the training you had as a postdoc to be your own person and set your own career is important, but you've got to broaden and be able, willing, and learn how to share with others, okay? And it takes a while to figure it out. Issues of who owns what and how much are topics that you're clueless about, and all you can do is give it a shot and see and read some books and ask people. But at the end of the day, the success of the company depends on the team. Truly depends on the team. It's like a football team. Use an analogy that's appropriate. There are people that are good in certain positions, but everybody has their role to play. And if one of them's having an off day, you can tell because there's a lot of reliance. As a graduate student, if you had an off day, you had an off day and no one cared. It was you making your own career in a vacuum. And it's not like that. So some of the training you've had may not apply to this startup thing. And again, being an entrepreneur and being like the Google guys, forget it. Okay? That's not real life. It truly is not. The ability to get a small team and put one foot in front of the other and grow something and find some money, create a product, you sell $100,000 worth of product, that's really satisfying. It's not a Google, it's not a Yahoo, it's not an Amgen, but it's satisfying. And then you begin to grow from there and build the team, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, we've got momentum here. And I'll tell you, because I've gone through it, success in a company is selling the company. It's being a shareholder and putting your stock on the table and having someone give you a check in return. It doesn't kill the company moves on. But you look at that and say, okay, that's what I've been sacrificing for, is that check. I'm not driven to get a big check, okay? Because that's not what counts in the team. Success in the team is having a product that people are willing to buy. But personally, you find that doing a good job, getting the product out that's useful, and then selling the business and having someone hand you a check, you think, ooh, this is really interesting. And I've talked to a bunch of entrepreneurs, and the masochists say, yes, now let's invest it in something else, and away we go. And other people say, been there, done that, away I go, take the check, going to buy a new house, going to buy a couple of new cars, and something like that. So the team is, it's a word that you have to experience. Like I say, it's like getting into a relationship with a significant other. You just got to learn what that is and being able to share this type of thing.
I just wanted to add to what everybody's saying about people, and I've said a little bit about people real quickly. When I was at the University of Utah, in Utah, I was on a committee sponsored by a law firm finding the best inventions in the state. And they would have every year, this panel would give these awards to the best inventions of the state, and they'd give them at a dinner. The keynote speaker at the dinner for one year was one of the founders of Pixar, who had gotten his PhD in physics at the University of Utah. He started his talk out by saying, what's most important, technology or people? About half the people in the room rose their hand for technology, the other half rose their hands for people. I rose my hand for technology. And he didn't say anything about that. Talked for another 40 minutes about how Pixar started. And he gave experiences and stories about the evolution of Pixar and what happened, how it developed, how it became a substantial organization, how it went through some of the productions that they developed, and exactly what happened with each production and how it went out and the trials that they had. When he ended his talk, he said, what's most important, technology or people? Everybody in that room rose their hand for people. And it was because when he talked about how his company developed, you could see that the technology didn't develop itself. The technology didn't market itself. The technology didn't commercialize itself. It was the people who did that.
Okay. Well, I would like to conclude this workshop and to thank our panelists for sharing with us their experiences about commercializing ideas. And also I would like to announce our second postdoctoral workshop about entrepreneurship that will be held on 29th of October by Dr. Mike Devine. And this workshop will provide us with key steps in the process of creating successful technology enterprise. With that, I would like to conclude today's workshop, and please join me in thanking our panelists for this very informative discussion today.
Can I just say, if anyone wants to buy a cup of coffee for me or Brent or any of the guys, do so. We'd be delighted just to sit down and shoot the breeze and just, this is all about relationships and linkages and being aware of what's going on. And the best decision in this whole field is making a knowledgeable decision you want to do something. Okay? And being an entrepreneur is a weird experience. Having an entrepreneurial mindset is a lot more important. What that means is deciding you're going to decide your own future, as opposed to doing this or doing that because someone suggested to you. So we're available for coffee or just generally whatever. We're happy to do so because the job for which we've been engaged at the university is to look for creative people like yourselves and say, how can we help you? And the answer usually is, I don't know, but I had this idea, so let's talk. And that's always a good place to get started.
Okay. Thank you.